There's an old saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this is oftentimes true. It doesn't have to be, but unless you have a tremendous amount of self-discipline and that you can experience the significant amount of love that the ocean of life exists within, you will tend to take the power to yourself. And over the history of humanity, this seems to have been the case. Sometimes in the most unsuspected ways, and at other times it's obvious the reasons why. I want you to listen to something that I recorded just the other day so that you can understand where Kundalini University, the 13 moons, and anything that we're connected with, where we stand on the issues that are being demonstrated in certain areas of this moment. The scandals and the corruption is not new. It's just resurfacing because of a new documentary. So take a listen. Greetings to all of you. I find this a very important topic that we all need to understand more clearly, every single one of us. And the topic is, how does power, regardless of how you achieve it, how does it interface inside of your character? And how does it cause your character to interface with those around you? This is being brought back into the light in the world of Kundalini with the recent production and publication of the series documentary called Breath of Fire. One thing that we all have to understand is that addiction, even an addiction to power, even sexual addictions, these are not things that come out into the open. And so it is possible for those who are involved to be able to hide it from even the people that are closest to them. It can't go on forever, understood. But we must understand also that with tremendous power comes a tremendous ability to be obscure, to be hidden, to be secretive. This is one of the distractions of tremendous power, is that you can get away with things that most people cannot. Not that you get away with them forever, as obviously the scandals have come out. The fact is, Kundalini is effective. And with the practice consistently of Kundalini Kriya and breathwork and meditation and mantra, power does come to you. How are you going to use this power? How are you going to use this power when you interact with those around you? How are you going to use this power when you interact with the students in front of you? How are you going to use this power inside yourself and around yourself? This is a key question that every single one of us should ask ourselves on a daily basis, because the human form has an addictive tendency towards power. And what it ends up creating is an opportunity for the misuse of power. And so what I see being portrayed in this documentary is a significant misuse of power. That misuse of power is not to be traced back to the source of Kundalini. That misuse of power is to be traced back to the source of human consciousness, literally of the mammalian brain, which is 335 million years old. This is where the wiring of how do we use this power that is going to be exposed to us, that is going to be made available to us through the practice of Kriya and Kundalini, meditations, breathwork, mantras, the postures, all of the asanas, and the movements. All of this gives us that ability for our physical, our emotional, and our mental clarity and focus to bring about that power. Are we going to use it in an instinctual, hierarchical way? Or are we going to use it in an intuitive, loving way? That's the question. I was born into yoga. My family, back to the 19 teens, studied with Sri Yukteswar Giri, who was Paramahansa Yogananda's guru, and then studied with Paramahansa. When I was born in 1945, the family was deep into the practice of Kriya Yoga. And so for me, when I was introduced to Kundalini in January of 1969, it was just a natural event, because the two are so very similar in the ways in which they raise the energy. So I was thrilled to find the Kriyas and the practices of Kundalini Yoga. And being actually not the first student, but the second student, I found it compelling to be close to a master of such an incredible science. And I watched how, as the power built amongst those who were following in 1970, 71, 72, and on forward, and as the crowds grew and the power built, I watched a transformation. And I remember saying to myself, I don't want that to happen to me. And one of the things that my wife and I have been very certain of and very secure in is that our attitude is that we are all equals. There's no hierarchy. There's no boss. There's no superiority. There's an equal playing field, and we're a spiraling circle, teachers and students spiraling upward in a collective effort to gain not only individual enlightenment, but global enlightenment. Because our task is not to do our best and then split. Our task is to do our best and enable others to do their best, and to enable others to do their best in their way, not having to copy exactly whatever our way is. Here, in much of what has been reported in this documentary, there were business practices that also not everyone was involved in these businesses. Actually, less than a dozen people were involved out of hundreds or perhaps thousands of students. Less than a dozen were involved in these nefarious business practices. The majority of the rest of us were involved in legitimate business either the business of teaching or the business of furniture production or the business of yogi tea. All of these businesses were legitimate. They did not have this selling over the phone of product and then triple billing, selling gemstones that weren't actually gemstones. All of these businesses and the smuggling of marijuana, these businesses were as hidden from the rest of us as was it being hidden from the authorities and from the general public. When this all came to light, when there would be a court case about it, that's when it would be exposed. And then there were some of us who determined that we were in the organization not at the behest of the organizational leaders, but at the behest of our own desire to be part of a really loving community. Because behind all of this expose and behind all of this sensational scandals, there was a community of incredibly loving human beings that were dedicated to the practice of Kundalini Yoga, meditation, and mantra. And these were the people that we called our friends, we called our family. We considered them our brothers and our sisters. And so, even though those are the kinds of things that don't sell documentaries, those are also the kinds of things that were truly far more than 50% of what was going on, more along the lines of 70 or 80% of what was going on within the community, within 3HO, within KRI, within Sikh Dharma. The majority was legitimate, the majority was honest, and the majority was very, very loving and supportive. As I said, only a small number of inside people were aware of what was going on and all that was going on. And that was kept very secretively under close wraps. And none of this is being said at this time to excuse anything. People were legitimately injured. People were legitimately traumatized. There are a couple of people that are quoted in the documentary, and their statements are that this was all made up. This was just a bunch of nonsense that was made up by a person who had ill intent. Not true. I've traced the Kriyas, I've traced the mantras, I've traced all of the teachings way, way back. They were not in the slightest bit made up in this moment. But what did happen was because of the power that was developed around the community, the idea of titles and superiorities and hierarchies, that was made up. And in the process of making that up, the powers were misused. And so take this to heart. The science is sound. Some of the scientists had deep, tremendous flaws. Some of the victims of those scientists had truly deep, traumatic experiences. And for them, we offer our help, we offer our prayers, we offer whatever it's going to take to make them whole. But we're not going to sacrifice the traditions that go back for thousands of years of the science that is being able to make such a difference in human consciousness. And so take this as my response to a number of people who have asked the question, where do we go from here? How do we integrate this documentary into our teachings? And so I would summarize it in this way. We separate the science from the scientists. We understand that the temptations of power and of the creation of hierarchies is very, very powerful. That human psyche has a nature of being addicted to the structure of hierarchy. This has been inbred in us for millions of years, ever since the beginning of the mammalian brain. It's a survival instinct, and what we would much more prefer is the intuitions of love and the leveling of the playing field so that there are no hierarchies. There's just communities in the upliftment of awareness and the increase in consciousness. And those of us that were dedicated to that line of participation, to carry that incredible technology that is Kundalini. The same science, the same metaphysics, the same spiritual path that has been walked for centuries and millennia. There you have a brief alignment and definition of what has gone on for a few decades, which is a small part of what has gone on for a few centuries in its holistic way. The few decades of the corruption of a few individuals is far outshone by the millions of individuals throughout the centuries that have gained great benefit from the science and practice of Kundalini. I know my wife and I participated in medical experiments in MRI tubes, doing mudras and mantras. And it was proven that the Kundalini technology actually has a physiological effect that is extremely beneficial. And so everything has its polarities. Let's be on the bright side of Kundalini. And let's spread these teachings, which are magnificent. And as we spread them, let's rejoice in the equality of all of us so that harmony can prevail and so that power does not necessarily corrupt and absolute power does not necessarily corrupt absolutely. Let's set a new trend so that we can be those powerful beings, those beings of enlightening, enlightenment, and enlightened natures. Let's allow for a pure, true awakening to take place without any of the corruption that has to follow in the power. Be well. Be at peace. Sat Nam.